Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, episode 139.
Wireless LAN Professionals is a place to educate, inform, encourage, and entertain those involved in wireless LANs. This Wireless LAN Professionals podcast is an audio manifestation of these goals. Our host is a wireless LAN veteran, consultant, designer, and teacher, Keith Parsons. And now, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals.
Hi again, Keith Parsons here. Today I've got with me Sam Clements. Samuel, how are you?
I'm doing well. How about yourself?
Very good. I saw a post you had made about getting wireless client information kind of into the whole algorithm and the thinking parts from a Cisco controller environment. So I thought, hey, why not just go straight to the guy and talk to him about it? So are you good with that?
Yeah, for sure.
Well, tell us, the problem is, forever, basically, all controller-based RRMs or ARM or Channelfly, whatever, is all based on the APs talking to each other, which is useful and helpful. But man, I've sure wished the ability to have a client have that input coming into those algorithms. And we're getting closer to that now, right?
Well, so it's not quite, client feedback into RRM, if you will, but there's obviously an industry-wide push for assurance-related products. How is my client performing on the network? What is it doing? Is there tangible information for me to act on there? And so I think there are a variety of sort of initiatives, if you will, about how to get that data back, whether it be from legitimate clients that are on your network or whether it be from synthetic sensors or clients on your network or all of those fun things. In Cisco land, we wrap that up under the DNA Center Assurance umbrella brand, if you will, which is sort of the marketing name for running all these things into some usable format for us. So, the long version of the story is that there is a variety of metrics that we're getting back from a variety of sources, and aggregating that into one area that gives us sort of actionable information is what it's all about. So there's not insignificant amount of marketing fluff that goes along with that. So I'll try and keep it sort of to the real tangible stuff that we have good, fun technical widgets to talk about.
Okay. Well, let's just back up a minute. So there are other people, Cape, NetBees, 7Signal, who take, and what they're saying is we'll make a client, obviously using some sensor or some Wi-Fi NIC, and we'll push data across to test your network, to test both the wireless side and the wired side and DHCP and whatever the pieces are behind. Mm-hmm. Is this more along those lines of
yes and no?
A network from an outside.
Yeah, so it's interesting because you look at, Cape and Mist and all of these folks who are doing these synthetic or real sensor-driven tests. And I think Cisco's approach is more along the lines of all these things are great. Why can't we have a bunch of information coming in from a variety of sources, whether those are synthetic sensor-based tests or if they're actual real clients that are giving us data. And so their approach is sort of a gather it all, and where it makes sense to use those metrics, use them, and where it doesn't, maybe don't.
So where else do they come from if not from some sensor device?
Well, so the Apple-Cisco relationship is always an interesting topic on that front. The latest iOS update actually sends information feedback to the infrastructure at association time about the wireless network that the client sees. So when you walk down a Cisco Apple relationship path, the interesting thing is that those two play really well together, and that's not just marketing fluff. You can actually log into a Cisco controller and ask it what the nearest APs that a client sees from the client perspective. And so we're starting to see.
Does it do correlation between that and what the APs see of each other?
Well, there should be a correlation, but
Well, I mean, does it do a comparison saying we think this, the client we saw thought
yes.
X, What's the differential? And then let's adapt by that differential.
Wouldn't that be great?
Well, we're thinking along the same lines.
Step number one is to see if we can get the information from the client reliably. I think the scenario you just described is a very logical next step for somebody.
Well, the other thing they could do if they have that data is given the controllers see the clients at some level, the clients report back they see something different. Do the clients all report the same, or what's the variation? What's the standard deviation in answers from the clients?
All of those, I think, are great questions.
Because if you can't offset that standard deviation change, then we trust a lot less that information coming from the clients.
Well, you get really philosophical really quickly. Today, this conversation is...
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Today, the conversation is Apple iOS only. And so, philosophical question number one is, do you trust Apple and iOS devices in particular to be representative of all of your client types as they're coming onto the network? So we know that getting this feedback from clients is good and informative and useful and enlightening and all that great stuff. But we only have one type of client that gets it back to us today. And in Cisco land, you have to be Cisco and Apple in order to get those two things to work together. So if you trust that Apple devices are representative of your environment, and there are certainly plenty of networks that do, do you then logically take the next step to say, my client's perspective of the world trumps my infrastructure's perspective of the world? And can you then turn that into actionable data from an RF health perspective? I would say that all those things are on the table. But today we've only been able to see movement out of the Cisco-Apple relationship. We've not seen Microsoft sort of step up. We haven't seen Android step up. You sort of have to have players from a variety of folks in the market in order to reach a critical mass. And today it's really only happening.
Could you go back to CCX clients?
Oh,
could they play the game too?
Well,
I mean, that's kind of where it started.
Sure. Yes. And CCX5 client feedback into the infrastructure was certainly a great first step, but it was Cisco proprietary. And you could say that the Cisco-Apple relationship is Cisco proprietary as well. But I guess when something says it's Cisco proprietary only, or you have this other same brand new magic widget that is Cisco and Apple proprietary, you start to maybe make a lot of sense. I think there are a whole lot of networks in the world where Cisco and Apple touch.
Obviously, you take the two, maybe not the biggest in either. Well, in Cisco, in Wi-Fi land, definitely. Apple's, not the biggest, but still a huge chunk. So in addition to that feedback from the actual Apple clients,
yep.
And I'm assuming those are iOS and not Mac.
Correct.
There's also some Cisco hardware that can play in this game.
Correct. So the sensor that is literally a sensor like you would consider, Cape Networks or 7Signal, or it's a box that plugs into your network that ultimately acts as a synthetic client. That's intended to provide sort of a non-Apple perspective back to the assurance platform, if you will. So the point behind having a sensor, of course, is that not everybody uses Apple. Not everybody uses the latest version of iOS, and a variety of things where, the Cisco-Apple relationship maybe doesn't work for everybody. And so, of course, the point being is if you can take low-cost sensors, sprinkle them all over your network, do synthetic tests that test, email or onboarding or DHCP performance and all that fun stuff. If you can do that in a predictable fashion and plug that into some sort of an assurance product that can give you long-term trending statistics, analytics about how your network is performing, you can then turn around and identify deviations when those occur.
And you said low cost. What kind of? I mean, how is this compared to other solutions from Mist or 7Signal or NetBees or?
That's a fantastic question.
Thank you. And it's I mean, do I have list prices available, or is it?
Contact your Cisco VAR for pricing. No, I actually don't know what list price is on the sensor. I understand it's going to be extremely competitive, and it will likely be notably less than that iPhone or Android device in your pocket.
Oh, well, then that's a lot less. That puts it in. Okay, that fits in the inexpensive.
Yeah, I mean, it's not going to be $59.99, I imagine. But total price for an iPhone X is what, $1,000, $1,200?
Yeah.
I personally, I would expect to pay less than that.
And is there any recommendations on where you place these? I remember a decade or so ago when we were designing air magnet enterprise sensors, we had a air magnet survey tool that you'd hit a button and say, if this is what our environment looks like, you need to put your sensors here.
I don't know that we have any environmental specific advice just yet from Cisco, but of course the idea is that if you're emulating a client, put the sensor where the clients should be. They're low cost, importable enough, and certainly non-intrusive. They're about the size of a pack of cigarettes, if you will. And they can be,
but they still take a PoE port.
No, not necessarily. So the point behind a wireless client is that they're not necessarily always Ethernet connected. So you can indeed have a PoE powered Ethernet uplink sensor that connects to the network and all that fun stuff. But does that really help you if you should be having a wireless connectivity anyway? Or a wireless connection, excuse me.
So these are also battery operatable?
I would say consider something that has a micro USB port on it that you can plug into a wall just like anything else.
So 5-volt rather than 48?
Yep.
Oh, that now means you can quickly strap a couple on forklifts or whatever to test that side of the network.
Absolutely.
Something mobile.
Absolutely.
And what's the projected availability and timing?
I believe they just launched. I know that they are doing some early field trials right now. Obviously, the Cisco Apple stuff is shipping today. And so that's something that if you have a Cisco controller and you have an Apple client, you can load the correct version of code on your controller and you can start seeing that feedback right away. The sensor stuff is a part of a larger assurance picture where you have to talk about the various and sundry other pieces that allow you to do those analytics. But what good is a sensor doing tests if you don't know what the results of those tests are?
And have them correlated together. I mean,
right.
There's a bigger picture to tie that together.
So the sensor in particular is interesting because it's reliant on some other big pieces in the network from an analytics and assurance perspective, whereas the iOS stuff is not. It's a Cisco A.P.A controller, some code, and you're sort of good to go. The sensor is interesting because it actually doesn't even require a controller. It simply requires the DNA assurance stuff that you hook to it, and then the DNA assurance engine, if you will, pushes the sensor to go do the tests.
That's a non-trivial investment.
Analytics is a non-trivial investment.
Okay. So perhaps very lightweight on the sensor side, cost-wise. But
for sure.
The infrastructure is a different issue.
Well, and you wouldn't necessarily look at DNA, and this is where it gets really, really philosophical really quickly, right? You wouldn't look at assurance just as a way to look at sensor information. You would look at assurance to slice and dice all the various and sundry inputs from all of your network, whether they be feedback from iOS devices or sensors, or your network as a sensor and intrusion, or even your existing APs maybe operating in flexible radio assignments, where we have an AP that has dual 5 gigahertz today. Maybe you don't need dual 5 gigahertz, but maybe you don't necessarily want that extra radio to be 2.4 gigahertz. Maybe you take that extra radio and turn it into an assurance sensor, where now you're actually using your existing APs that you maybe were previously using as dual 5 gigahertz. And maybe you take one of those radios out of service, it becomes a sensor for a little while, and then once it's done with its testing, it goes back into dual 5 gigahertz mode. There's a tremendous amount of flexibility. And when you talk about bringing all those data sources into one big aggregate picture about how your network is working, that's then where the DNA assurance message really starts to hit home.
Is there on the roadmap, and obviously you're not Cisco, just if you'd heard anything like this that's outside of NDA, is there on the roadmap anything that would allow for internal feedback, perhaps into the RRM algorithm, to say, we saw this from iOS, we saw this from our sensors, we saw this from our FRA radios that went over into DNA. Maybe we should adjust this way. I mean, it's that AI piece to help control that.
Yeah, that would indeed be neat, wouldn't it? I'm not entirely sure that there's anything public facing along those lines, but I think that if you look at what the folks like Aruba are doing, or all of the sensor based organizations where they're taking and they're gathering this data and trying to make it actionable, even look at like folks like Nyansa. I think that the perfect panacea is that you have all this information coming in, and that the control plane of your network is ultimately making more intelligent decisions, whether those be RRM decisions or, fill in the blank, right? It's more than just wireless. I think it's all of the control plane stuff in your network layer, whatever that means. And I think making that more intelligent is always a noble goal.
Most definitely. The idea is, I like the idea of where all this is going to head to more big data, better AI, better control. Nyansa has their input. Rasa over at Aruba that they picked up does the same kind of thing.
Yep.
But where's the I in the AI?
It's in the future.
I mean, there's a lot of issues with RRM. I mean, we could have a huge discussion about RRM, but RRM works when you tune it and you play with it right. But there's still some issues. It's not nearly perfect enough to just say, oh, I totally trust it. This extra piece of feedback, though, would allow a trust to go up a little higher because there's some input from that side. But again, do you turn it over to some AI to make those decisions? I think if I remember, Rasa was doing instead of syncing directly into ARM, they were going to put a human in the loop, that it would give recommendations into a format that would say, we recommend you do these things. Now, Mr. Human, click on the button and we'll go apply them.
Yeah, in fact, I think they were even going to go one step further and say, we're going to gather all this analytics from all of our sites that want to contribute, and then we're actually going to roll that into the ARM process, if you will, and we're going to make that a more intelligent process based on the feedback that we're given into the Rasa engine. Is that what Cisco's going to do? I don't know. That's a good question.
Well, at least we'll have more data points.
For sure.
More data points is always better. And who knows? Android might come up with their own and they'll work with, I don't know, Extreme or something.
Is that your winning combination?
No, I was just making something up there. I mean, because there's only so many vendors in the marketplace on both the client side, that have the biggest hit.
I mean, ideally, what I would think that would be most neat would be to have that Apple Cisco relationship long term turn into something more open. I'd love to see more clients support feedback into the infrastructure using that mechanism, and I'd like to see more clients support feeding back into other vendors. I don't know if that's going to happen anytime soon, but this Apple Cisco thing seems to have deeper teeth in it than CCX did. Certainly than CCX has today.
Well, if CCX had been offered to Apple for free, maybe we would have got it sooner.
Man, you with the philosophical questions.
Yeah, and you can foresee, Apple would love to, whatever comes out of this relationship with Cisco, be applied to all infrastructure so their devices work better everywhere. And Cisco would like to see all clients play nicer. So they both have it in their own self-interest to expand and make it more open. But sharing all the details openly is a little tough. Though I don't know if it came from the Cisco Apple relationship, but Apple and both Apple and Cisco have been documenting and putting up some recommendations and information about how their clients roam and what triggers their roam. Maybe they're not full disclosure, but at least they give us, from a design standpoint, some targets to shoot for.
Way more information than we've had in the past.
Yeah, and if it makes anyone else come along and play, hey, we're talking to you, Android, and Windows machines, and Dell. Everyone, tell us what your devices need and want, and we can help deliver it.
Well, and I saw something the other day. Somebody said something about some sort of grassroots effort to expose the hidden, logic behind client roaming and all that fun stuff, as if there was nobody in the market that exposed that information. And iOS devices, I think, represent at least a large majority of clients, and that information is perfectly free for the taking.
Well, the part that they give, there's obviously other more proprietary issues of how many retries before I trigger a roam. I mean, just knowing voice over IP handsets have obviously an entirely different algorithm that they have to work on, because they're in the middle of a call and they have to make different choices.
For sure.
And so, and each of those is proprietary, let alone Apple. And one of the things, just while we're on this subject, I've got you here. Wi-Fi calling, it kind of bugs me that it's one of those things that the phone was designed to talk over a cellular network, and our cellular company said, hey, rather than build towers to support you, why don't you just use your Wi-Fi in the back end? And in your house with no roaming, Wi-Fi calling works amazingly well. But that roaming algorithm inside iPhone was not designed to be a voice over IP client.
Well, so there's a lot of different ways to take that conversation. We see, for example, healthcare environments use iPhone-based applications, and those are telephony applications, messaging applications that are outside of the core call kit functionality, and those work just fine in the facility. And so that's essentially a flavor of Wi-Fi calling, if you will. And I think it comes down to building the network correctly, roaming gracefully, fast, secure reauthentication, that RKV conversation. And so I think there are definitely mobile clients that do that more gracefully than others. But you're 100% correct. I think the telcos got sick and tired of having people come to them saying, hey, we're going to install a neutral host DAS that is pay to play. And, oh, by the way, you're paying us. I think they saw Wi-Fi calling as a way out of that.
Hey, I like that. That was a good model
yeah.
for consumers.
Which is why it fell apart.
Schools or hotels or big universities, it was really good when all the vendors would pay. They kind of flipped that on its head, though.
They did, and I think that in conjunction with the Hotspot 2.0 efforts and the Passpoint efforts paint a really interesting conversation where the telcos are driving technology adoption, whether us enterprises want it or not.
They do have some power in those environments.
They do.
Well, what do you see as the future coming for? I mean, these 1800s is the next step. Other vendors going to come and play along?
Well, again, with a good question, I think that what's going to happen is you'll likely see other vendors sort of augment with existing solutions, or maybe even do some acquisitions to cover those deficiencies in their portfolios. It's not uncommon for Cisco to do something shiny new and then have a competitor go, oh, that's a great idea. Who does that on the market today? Can we integrate them with our portfolio? Do they have open APIs? Hey, look, let's go buy those Cape guys.
I'm sure Dave and his team would love that.
I don't doubt it.
Yeah, well, good deal. It's a nice topic, a nice thing to think of. I just applaud everyone's effort in this environment who's just trying to make Wi-Fi better. So whether it be Cape or NetBees or Cisco's 1800s, let's stay on this path of making Wi-Fi as the access layer of our networks be as good as possible.
For sure, at least until we take one huge step backwards with AX, right?
AX is dead, don't you know? That's what Jason said at the last conference. So.
Admittedly, he said he would say he was wrong if indeed he was.
He did. And hey, sometimes you just make statements because they're loud and bold and they get some attention. And look at, we're talking about him now, so it obviously worked. That's a shout out to you, Jason. Well, thanks for your time today, and hopefully we'll see you at WOPC and learn lots of cool new things there.
Absolutely. Looking forward to it.
Thanks, Sam.
Thanks, Keith.
10 Talks.
So originally, this was going to be titled a shameless vendor presentation because I was going to shamelessly promote my product, and that was when I was at metageek. As many of you know, I'm not at metageek anymore. Now I'm at Ekahau. But the metageek team, still great friends of mine. Had a great 5 years with them. They're all personal friends. They're here. I'll show you their Twitter handles and stuff at the end. And so I was more than happy to go ahead and give this presentation, not only because they're good friends and we had a great 5 years together, but this is a sweet product. I mean, it is really, really good. And giving this presentation meant that I got a copy of it, so that helped out a little bit too. So it's no longer called a shameless vendor presentation, but Matthew came up with this, which I think is kind of nice. Look into my Eye P.A. It's because it looks like an eye, right? You see that. So a little bit about me. My name's Joel, and I'm a sales engineer at Ekahau. I have been described as a pretty good potato, so that's good. I like that. I think that's pretty good. Also, some of you did some Ekahau art when you took the ECSE, right? This is my entry into the Hall of Fame of Ekahau art. I call it the dark side of the room, so that's the best I've got for art for you guys. So what we're going to do here when we talk about packet analysis with Eye P.A. is we're going to kind of do what you do with algebra, what you do with math, is we're going to back up to the very beginning. I'm going to start at the absolute basics, and we're just going to fly through that stuff as quick as we can, and then we're going to jump into actually using Eye P.A. and looking at what it looks like to perform airtime analysis with Eye P.A. So as you know, there are three main types of interference. There's co-channel interference. That's where we have a bunch of client devices and APs. We'll just call those stations on the same channel, and they're all going to compete for opportunities to talk, right? Then there's adjacent channel interference, which occurs when we have APs and client devices on overlapping channels. When that happens, well, they don't politely get along. They just interrupt each other, right? Which is going to cause frame corruption and all kinds of issues. And then, of course, there's non-Wi-Fi interference. Things like cordless phones, wireless video cameras, microwave ovens. In the 5 gigahertz band, we're seeing some fun stuff now, like 5 gigahertz drone cameras and things like that. So there's some fun stuff starting to, I say fun, because I enjoy interference. Most of you probably don't, right? I'm kind of backwards in that way. But we're starting to see some of these things, even up in the 5 gigahertz band, that when they get on a channel, they just get on a channel. They don't care. They do not care what's already transmitting there. They just start talking. And when that happens, a Wi-Fi device can't transmit. It can't do anything. Remember, the most important thing to understand about Wi-Fi is that on any given channel at any given time, only one device can talk. So let's say that we've got an access point here, and it needs to talk. The first thing it's going to do is it's going to do a clear channel assessment, right? It's just going to listen to see if there's anything on the channel. And if there's nothing there, if it has an opportunity, it'll take that opportunity to transmit some data. On the other side, the laptop will receive that data and it'll go, oh, let's take a look at it and see if it's legit. And it looks at it with the magnifying glass. And if it's good, it'll go, yep, check, I understood that data, and it's going to reply with an acknowledgement. Now, there's a couple of things that can go wrong here. Let's say that the access point transmits the data, but the data just never quite makes it to the laptop, right? It never quite makes it there. When that happens, the access point's not going to hear an acknowledgement, right? We're not going to transmit acknowledgement, so the access point's just going to start going, well, okay, I never heard anything back from the laptop, so it must not have received the data frame. So it's going to transmit that data again and again and again. It's going to keep trying to get that data through to the laptop. I like to think that Wi-Fi is a lot like my 3-year-old daughter in this way. I've got 3 daughters. The oldest is 6, the youngest is 3, and they've all gone through this stage where they have lots of questions, right? And so let's say that she's an access point for a second. Let's see what it's like when we compare her to an AP or to a client. It doesn't really matter. This can go in either direction, right? If I'm sitting on the couch and I'm reading a book or something like that, and she says something to me and I don't answer, what's she going to do? She's going to retransmit, right? And she's going to retransmit again and again and again and again and again until finally something makes it through to me. And I go, oh, yep, check. And I give her some kind of acknowledgement, right? So if you've, I don't know, if you've ever had kids or if you've ever been around kids or maybe you've just seen some kids from a distance, you know that they're like Wi-Fi in this way. They are just like Wi-Fi devices. The big takeaway from this is that on any given channel at any given time, one device talks, right? We hear vendors out there that say, oh, well, my access point supports 500 clients or 1,000 clients, right? It's not really about what the AP supports, right? We've got enough processing power, we've got enough RAM. That's not what it's really about anymore. It's about the channel. What can we support on the channel? So let's say that we've got an Android phone here, and it's transmitting something to this access point. While that transmission is occurring, everything on the channel has to basically shut up and be quiet. On any given channel, at any given time, one device talks. One device talks at a time. So how do we see what's going on in the spectrum? Well, here's a couple of traditional ways of doing it. One is with a Wi-Fi scanner. A Wi-Fi scanner just uses a plain old normal Wi-Fi adapter to scan for wireless networks. And that's nice because we could see some pretty interesting pieces of information, like we can see there's a couple of APs on this channel. We can see there's some co-channel interference here. We can get some good pieces of information out of that. But when we get spectrum analysis, that's when we really kind of ramp up what we can see in the air, right? There's a couple more really, really critical pieces of information that we get with spectrum analysis. The first one is that we can see interference from non-802.11 devices. The cordless phones, the video cameras, all that stuff. We can see anything that chirps in the spectrum, right? We can also see 802.11 channel congestion, right? We can see how often Wi-Fi devices are talking. We can see how often they are utilizing the channel, see how busy they are keeping that channel. So there's basically two steps when you're troubleshooting a wireless issue. We're talking about an issue between an AP and a client device, right? Step one is going to be to look for a non-Wi-Fi signature. If you see a non-Wi-Fi signature, you're going to use spectrum analysis at layer one to take a closer look at what's going on, right? That's where you're going to stop. If you see a cordless phone there, you're going to seek and destroy, right? You're going to try to get rid of that. You're not going to move on to another tool. If you see heavy utilization that looks like Wi-Fi, if you see a Wi-Fi signature, well, it's time to put the spectrum analyzer away and move up to layer two. We're going to look at the packets to see what is actually happening in that environment. Packet analysis helps us answer a few questions, like who is talking slowly and who is talking the most and who is repeating themselves all the time. One thing we really have to watch out for in Wi-Fi is slow data rates. Like, for example, let's say that we've got an Android phone here and it's nice and close to the AP, so they're able to have a conversation at a signaling rate of like 65 megabits per second, right? But then we've got this other Android phone that's way on the fringe of the coverage cell, so it's had to back off and slow down to 1 megabit per second. This 1 megabit per second device is going to talk 65 times slower than the device that's close to the AP. It's kind of like the slow kid in the back of the classroom. Do you guys know who I'm talking about? The slow guy in the back of the classroom? Yeah, right? Sorry to pick on you guys in the back, The slow guy in the back of the classroom raises his hand and goes, teach. I had a question. You're just like, come on, just get on with it, right? So we can get on with the class. Slow devices are like the slow kid in the back of the classroom. So packet analysis helps us look at all of those details of 802.11 congestion on a channel. I like to think of utilization and airtime as basically two separate measurements of something very similar, right? Utilization, I see that as a layer one measurement, right? That's the percentage of time that we saw RF in the air. That's how often we heard RF in the air on that channel at that frequency. I like to see airtime as a layer two measurement. That's the percentage of time that 802.11 devices reserved time on the air, right? That's how often we actually saw those devices reserve time on the air. And here's how I know that I'm not wrong. When David Coleman and Devin both retweet you, I think that's a good sign, right? So I felt like that was a pretty decent sign that I was probably on track there. So let's take a look at the 3 different types of frames that we'll see in wireless: management, control, and data frames. And by the way, if you forget which major frame type corresponds to which frame subtype, Eye P.A in the filters bar has this really sweet cheat sheet built in. So you can just drop that menu down and you can look at that and go, oh cool, a beacon is a type of management frame, and you can see which color it corresponds to in the application as well. The first type are management frames. They basically help stations join and leave wireless networks. So some examples of that are a beacon. A beacon is just an access point announcing that it exists. For example, my old Aerohive AP330 on the ceiling at home. Any Aerohive guys in the room? I'm using an AP330. You know, it's an oldie, but it's a goodie, right? Yep. Yeah, right? So the AP330 on the ceiling at home right now is sitting there going, hey, I'm Joel's network. I'm here. I support these data rates. I support this type of encryption. You can connect to me. Hey, I'm Joel's network. I'm here. That's a beacon. It's just an announcement of an access point's existence. I like to think of a probe as kind of the opposite of a beacon. That's when my device looks for familiar networks. So it might, you know, maybe as I'm walking down the street or something, it might be going, hey, Joel's network, are you there? Hey, Joel's network, are you there? And it'll move on to the next device in the list looking for familiar networks. Next are authentication frames. That's a holdover from WEP. We don't really, they're kind of a formality if they're still there. Is probably the quickest way to describe that. And then association frames, which are part of the process of us actually getting connected to a network. The next type of frame is a control frame. They basically control the RF medium and make sure that other frames get delivered. They ensure the delivery of other frames. The first is an ACK, right? We transmit data, we receive an ACK, right? Which is what my daughter is looking for. If she comes up and shows me the pretty picture that she drew, right, of the flowers, which is flowers, then I've got to give her some kind of acknowledgement, right? Or she's going to keep trying to show me that picture until I acknowledge it, right? The next type is a block acknowledgement. That's when we can basically acknowledge a lot of data frames at the same time. So instead of going data acknowledgement, data acknowledgement, data acknowledgement, we can go data, 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 acknowledgement, data, 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 acknowledgement, right? Starts sounding like a System of a Down song. Then there's RTS, CTS, request to send, clear to send. We actually, back when I was at metageek, we actually had a great example of RTS, CTS happen in the office at metageek. It was, this was pretty fun. So I'm gonna just draw a little picture up here in the corner. So this was the layout of the floor plan at metageek. And down here, we kind of had this kitchen right here, right? Ryan, you remember the kitchen, right? And up here, kind of where control is, we had Rich. He's our grumpy IT guy, or was the grumpy IT guy at metageek. And he's still there. I'm not, but he is. So Rich was sitting at his desk, and I was standing. I'm going to draw some stick figures here. Rich was standing in the doorway I was staying in the doorway between the two rooms, and then Lael was standing over here at the kitchen sink, right? And so all of a sudden, they both started talking to me at the exact same time, and I had to go, whoa, 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 Rich, Lael, hang on, guys. Both of you are talking to me at the same time. That is an example of a hidden node problem. If I'm the AP and they're the clients, they can't hear each other, but I can hear them. And so they both interrupted each other, and I couldn't decode any of the frames from them, right? I couldn't understand what they were trying to say. And so I had to go, whoa, 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 Rich, Lael, hang on a second, one at a time. If we'd been using RTS, CTS, here's what the conversation would have looked like. Lael would have said, hey, Joel, can I ask you a question? I would have said, yes, Lael, you may ask me a question. And then Rich would have known, oh, Joel's already talking to somebody, so I need to back off for a minute, right? That's RTS, CTS in action. The third frame type is data frames. This is the actual data on the network. These are the only thing that carry any data that makes it on to the wired side of the network. This is the whole reason why we have wireless networks. The three are, of course, a data frame. And then a quality of service data frame where we attach some kind of priority to a frame so we can do things like deliver voice over IP frames first and let the Facebook page wait a little bit longer to load, right? Because that doesn't need to be delivered as quickly. And then there's null data frames. Those are for things like power save poles. They're not actually a data frame, but here they are. They kind of got shoved into this category. So those are three main types of frames. The next thing I want to talk about is how devices determine who is going to get to talk next on the air. Now, I'm going to streamline this just a little bit for the sake of time, but watch closely, okay? Because this one can be a little bit tough to follow. So let's say that over here we have 6 stations. A station can be either an access point or a client. It doesn't matter. It's just one of those 2 things, right? And then we've got time moving in this direction, so we can see what happens over time. So let's start out down here. It looks like station 5 is just finishing up sending some data, and then there's a short interframe spacing, basically just a little breath, a little break in the air, and then station 5 is going to transmit its acknowledgement to say, okay, yep, got your data, we're done. And now they are done with their transmission. Now, station 4 and station 2 have both been watching the channel, waiting for an opportunity to talk, and they see one. They see a diffs. They both see this little slice of time where nothing happens, and that's a signal to both of them like, ooh, there's an opportunity, I might be able to transmit here. When that happens, in their own heads, they're each gonna pick a number. They're each gonna roll the dice and pick a number. So station 2 is gonna pick a 7, and station 4 is going to pick a 9, and they're each in their own heads gonna count in unison, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. And when station 2 hits 7, when it counts up to 7, it'll go, sweet, I counted to 7 and nothing talked. It's my turn to talk. So it's going to transmit its RTS, its request to send. Meanwhile, station 4 went 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Oh, it's not my turn to talk. So it's going to back off. It's going to defer to the other client and wait for an opportunity to talk. I'm simplifying a little bit, but that is kind of the gist of how it works. So when station 2 transmits its RTS, it signals to everything else in the channel, hey guys, we're gonna talk. So we're gonna reserve some time on the air. Station 1 is going to transmit a clear to send, and that's gonna let these guys know, hey guys, everybody synchronize your watches for this much time because I am reserving this much time on the air for this conversation. So now we're going to go ahead, station 2 is going to transmit its data, station 1 is going to reply with an acknowledgement, and we're done. We've used up our slice of time that we reserved on the air to talk. Now you remember how station 4 tried to get an opportunity to talk, didn't make it? Well, he only had 2 backoff slots remaining, so now he only has to count to 2. Now, it doesn't guarantee him access to the medium, but he's got a way better shot now than he did before. So he'll count 1, 2, okay, cool. Nothing started talking, so it's my turn to talk. So it'll go ahead and transmit its data, which will cause station 2 to defer, and then station 3 will send the acknowledgement, and we're done. So that's what the airtime arbitration process looks like. But how do we visualize this? How do we see what's going on? Now, Wireshark is one of my favorite tools ever. It's awesome. In fact, tomorrow I'm going to do a little 10 talk about how to put some cool coloring rules in Wireshark. Pretty simple 10 talk, but it should be some fun. The problem with Wireshark is it's really difficult to visualize airtime usage. What is actually happening on the air? Who is talking fast? Who is talking slow? Who's repeating themselves? And that's where Eye P.A comes in. With Eye P.A, we basically get a multi-layered pie chart that shows us how often everything talked. So let's take a look at what these multi-layered pie charts look like. So this represents 100% of the airtime that was used on that channel, or 100% of the airtime that was used on that channel. And then if we break it down into the different layers, we can see what talked, what used the airtime on that channel. So if we look at this layer of the chart, going from the inside, right? The inside layer is our network. Now, a network can be composed of many, many access points, as you know. And if you've got more than one AP on a channel that can hear each other, that's, you may have a problem there, right? That might be a bad thing. So we can show multiple APs nested above this network layer. Now, if we go one more layer out, now we're looking at the individual access points. So here's an access point, and here's an access point, and you can see that this access point right here, this particular access point used up about half of the total amount of airtime on the channel during this packet capture. So we can see that it used up half the time. Let's go and clear this, make a little bit room for the next layer, which is the client device. So we can see that this client device used up about 1/3 of the time on the channel. The outermost layer shows us the frame type. Basically, we give a color to each individual frame type. So if we see orange, orange is our control frames, like our acknowledgements, our block acts, and our RTS, CTS. If we see purple, that's management overhead. That's beacons and probe responses. If you do a packet capture of your wireless network and you're using like 50 to 60% of your airtime and it's all being eaten up by management overhead, you're gonna have a bad time, right? If we see blue, that's a really good thing because that's actual data. That's actual time that we spent moving data across the network. So let's go ahead and do a demo. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to fire up AirTool by our good friend Adrian, and I'm just going to go ahead and perform a packet capture. I'm going to import that packet capture into Eye P.A in just a moment. I'm going to show you a sample that's included, then we'll come back to this packet capture I'm going to go ahead and take now. So I'm just going to do a capture on channel 6. 2.4 gigahertz is usually kind of interesting because there's just like a ton of management overhead and there's a ton of retries and everything's just a big mess in the 2.4 gigahertz band. So we've got a 2 megabyte capture file, so I'll stop it. And of course, we won't use Wireshark today. Don't worry, we will come back to that. So then in my Windows VM, we've got that file that AirTool made on the desktop, and we're going to come back to that in just a minute. First, I'm going to open up this sample packet capture that's included with Eye P.A, and I really like this one because it shows a pretty neat demo that a vendor was doing at a trade show. Now, as we all know, trade show Wi-Fi is usually a huge mess, right? But there was a vendor who was streaming video to 100 iPads concurrently on a trade show floor, and we thought, that's kind of cool. Let's see how they're doing it. So we got a packet capture to show. So if we look at the innermost layer, we can see the SSID of this is iPad Demo 6. That's the name of the network. Now there's a couple of really narrow slices here. There's a little guy in there called Voice WLAN 2, hardly used any airtime at all. And then there's one there, I can just barely see it. HP Blogger N is in there as well. Didn't hardly use up any airtime at all. If we look on this network, we only heard one AP, and that's a really good thing. That means they're not trying to stack up multiple APs on the same channel. So we know that they're being efficient in that way. If we move one more layer out, we can see all these individual Apple devices. I'm going to say those are probably the iPads, right? I know, I'm real bright. I can really see what's going on here. So we could see all these Apple devices and how much airtime each one of them used. Now up above, this view up here is called the airtime over time graph. This basically shows us how much airtime we consumed throughout the packet capture, and the vertical axis basically gives us a percentage of how much airtime was used. So we can see on this channel that we had a portion where we were using 100% of the airtime, and then we kind of fell into these two troughs here. We had a couple of spikes where we used some airtime, and then we fell back off and didn't use a whole lot of airtime. There's a few gaps there. So that's nice to see what happened over the full capture. The next thing we can do is we can actually drill down into these pie charts by clicking on them. So for example, if we click on the access point, so we're down in the access point layer now, we can see that this access point was responsible for pretty much everything that happened on the channel. So let's go another layer down. So let's go take a look at one of the client devices. Now, the airtime over time graph highlights in green where the selected device consumed airtime. So we zoom in a little bit here so you guys in the back can see it. We can see that this client device used a bunch of airtime in that point in time. If we back out and select a different client device, we can see this client used some airtime there. Let's go look at the next one, see where it used airtime. This one used its airtime here. So one thing that I'm noticing here is that none of these iPads were trying to buffer video at the same time. They all buffered video at separate times, and I think that's a big part of how they were able to stream video to 100 iPads concurrently on a trade show floor at the same time. Another thing that I'm noticing about all of these client devices is that they're able to maintain pretty fast data rates. If we look, about 25% of the time, we're able to maintain 24 megabits per second. About 18% of the time, we hit 52 megabits per second, and then 30% of the time, we were able to hit 58 megabits per second. So we're getting on the channel and getting off the channel very, very quickly, having a nice, efficient conversation. The other thing that I'm noticing is that we're spending most of our time transmitting QoS data frames. That's most of what we're doing here. There's just a little slice of time here that's tied up in management overhead, namely in block acknowledgements, RTS, CTS, and some normal good old acknowledgements. So we're able to spend most of our time transmitting data, and we're doing it quickly, and that's part of how they were able to stream video to so many iPads at the same time. If we want to actually look at what we've drilled down into, we have essentially applied filters by drilling down into this specific conversation. So if we skip over to the Packets tab, now we can actually see that conversation between the access point and the client device. So for example, if you look right here, we could see that we had some data and then an ACK, and then we had a bunch of data, and then we had a block acknowledgement, and then a request to send and a clear to send, and the whole thing starts over again. So you can see that conversation unfolding as the packet capture progresses. So now, just for fun, let's open up that packet capture that we grabbed earlier, and let's take a look at what's going on in the air right now. I have no idea what's going to happen. Okay, so I did this capture with AirTool, and I did something dumb when I got the packet capture. I forgot to disassociate from the network. So I'm going to come up here to the filters bar, and I'm going to uncheck channel 149. We're just going to get rid of that one to take that out of the equation. So that way we're only looking at airtime usage for one individual channel. Oh, and there's Adrian. He probably could have told me what I was doing wrong when I did that. We'll have to talk afterwards, Adrian. So if we look at what's going on, let's take a look. So we've got one called WLPC 2.4. There's an Apple device associated there. That's kind of weird. Somebody's on the 2.4 gigahertz band, and we can see that they had a retry rate of about 13%. So 13% of the time, they had to repeat themselves. We can also look and see how much time we spent in probe responses, beacons, what else is happening, beacons, probe responses, and some other things happening here, but we can see exactly how much airtime was consumed over time by looking at it's mostly purple. We spent most of our time on management overhead and almost no time transmitting actual data. If we go to the Analyze tab, this is going to show us some specifics about those networks. So if I star the WLPC 2.4 here, it's going to tell us about some issues that it ran into, like, hey, you've got legacy data rates enabled. If you hand this tool to somebody that's fairly new, hopefully this will help them understand that they need to do things like disable legacy data rates and disable legacy protection mechanisms. Tell them, hey, you don't need to worry about supporting 802.11b data rates. And if they want to learn more, they can hit learn more, and then if they don't want to learn more, they can hit TLDR, too long didn't read. It'll also, the engine in here will also do some fun things like highlight devices with high retransmits. So for example, this particular Apple device right here had a 23% retransmission rate. So we automatically highlight that to help you see, like, hey, there's something going on there. There's something retransmitting a lot on that. Maybe it's a chipset issue. Maybe you've got adjacent channel interference. And so that's some of the things that Eye P.A will help you see on that network. A couple more goodies, a couple more things that you can do is let's say that there's a specific client device that you want to filter down to. So for example, let's take a look at all the client vendors that are Apple here. So we'll just apply a filter there so we can see what's going on. And then let's click on this specific device so we can get a closer look at that specific device. If you hit File and then hit Send to Wireshark, you basically suddenly turned Eye P.A into a filtering tool. It's going to filter down to those results that you've got selected and send those over to Wireshark. So if you want to do deeper analysis, you could perform that analysis over there in Wireshark. So to close out, the whole metageek team, one last thing, getting PCAPs. My favorite way is with Adrian's tool with AirTool on Mac OS. metageek does supply the AirPCAP NX if you need something USB based, but you could also get packet captures. If you have OmniPeak, you can bring in your captures from there. You can bring them in from an access point, or if you're savvy with Linux, you can even get stuff from Linux.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of the Wireless LAN Professionals Podcast, the podcast for wireless LAN professionals by wireless LAN professionals. Be sure to follow us on Twitter @WirelessLANPros for all the latest news and updates, and also connect directly with Keith on Twitter @KeithRParsons. Head over to www.wlanpros.com for this episode's show notes, as well as the latest in all things Wi-Fi.